So I want to stick with the theme of identitarianism, but slightly on a lighter note. Kamala Harris, her campaign is in full swing. There's been questions around her racial identity, but also she's using identity politics to quite a big degree. There's been these two groups, white dudes for Kamala Harris and white women answer the call. Basically these giant Zoom fundraising groups. Essentially getting, I think you could say, Rakib, maybe exploiting white guilt to a certain extent, getting people feeling, certain rich white liberals feeling that they must support Kamala Harris because she's a black woman.
Well, I think it's the very silly side of identitarianism, really. The belief that you have to support a particular candidate because they have the characteristics which are favourable, and the identitarian pyramid. Being non-white and also female, but I do think that I think that President Trump, I think some of his interventions have been quite poor, actually. Sort of attacking Kamala Harris. Oh, is she Indian? Is she black? She's not sure what she is. I think very clearly, Kamala Harris, the vice president, she's been very clear that she takes pride in her black identity, but also her South Indian identity, a black identity specifically being from the Caribbean. I believe her father, Donald Harris, respected scholar, is of Jamaican origin. So I think that the US has a very interesting political culture where you also have groups like, for example, Hispanics for Trump. You have those groups as well. So I think that the ancestry and in terms of one's personal identity, it does count for a loss, for better or worse, in the United States. But I think that if people want to support Kamala Harris, it should ultimately be down to policy or what her track record is in public office. If there's a white middle class progressive in the United States, they feel that, I must support Kamala because she is a non-white woman, then actually they're not contributing very much to the race relations conversation in the United States, in my view.
Definitely. And well, you talked about sort of her policy, her record. I mean, it's not a good one, is it, Tom? It's very hard to understand what the excitement is about, really, a lot of the time.
Oh, absolutely. And also, she's a bit of a Keir Starmer insofar as she has the courage to hold political positions that suit her near-term goals. I mean, there was a piece in the New York Times even this week pointing out that since she last made her tilt at the presidential nomination back in 2019, she's changed her position on single-payer healthcare, on border funding, on all kinds of different issues, on banning fracking. She's basically hurtled rightwards, roughly speaking, because of the fact that it's no longer politically expedient. At a time when the kind of Sanders wing was more in the ascendancy, she felt the need to mouth those platitudes. Now she's going, at least trying to kind of present herself as more of a centrist and a moderate. But this is a familiar story, isn't it? The kind of politician who doesn't really stand for very much. Identity politics sort of fills the void, or it provides a gloss to an otherwise uninteresting politician. There's a kind of sense where it almost doesn't matter what I stand for or what my policies are. Won't it be brilliant if I was elected? What that statement that would make for society. And I think it's worth pointing out that, even when Obama was elected in 2008, he actually did pitch himself very much as a kind of unifier, given his biracial heritage and so on, that, that was very much the address. Obviously there was a lot of identity politics discussion swarming around that, but that was the pitch he wanted to make. His rhetoric changed very much over the course of his presidency. But I think the thing it reminds me of more directly is the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016. Very much the pitch was, I know I'm really unpopular, I know a lot of you don't like me, but wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a female president? She would literally put out videos of her breaking through glass ceilings, enlisting celebrities in particular, black celebrities, Hispanic celebrities, millennial celebrities, whatever, to appeal to those specific racial, generational blocks. And we all know how that turned out. I mean, she lost amongst white women who, if you buy the identitarian logic, should have been the most inspired by her particular campaign. Donald Trump improved the Republican standing amongst ethnic minorities in that 2016 election, and he continued to do so in 2020, despite Joe Biden's emphatic victory and the fact that Biden had strong support amongst African Americans. You still saw the support for the Republicans amongst Hispanics, Black Americans, Asian Americans ticking upwards. It's actually one of my kind of favorite counterintuitive facts about Donald Trump is that he's kind of seemingly single-handedly reversed the racial polarization of American electoral politics, even whilst being accused of being a fascist and a white supremacist and so on. But I guess what I'm getting at is that, if Harris does pull off an unlikely victory in November, it will be in spite of, not because of, this sort of identitarian politics, which leaves a lot of people cold. At the very least, it leaves a lot of people, including ethnic minority people, thinking, I get that this makes the white dudes on that Zoom call feel good about themselves. Yeah. I get that this will get Kamala Harris the presidency, but what's in it for me? And so I think, as I say, this is something which leaves a lot of voters cold, not necessarily just, the white Americans. People across the piece just think, you're just giving me platitudes here and warm words rather than anything that I can actually get behind properly.
Definitely. And Rakib, I wanted to get your thoughts on the sort of Trump's sort of multiracial populism, because he was speaking this week to a convention of black journalists. It was a very testy and hostile exchange, but, it is true that he has increased his standing significantly among black men recently. And as Tom was outlining, every opportunity improving his ratings among Hispanics. I mean, what is the appeal of someone like Trump, who we are told is a white supremacist to ethnic minorities?
Well, I just think building some of the points that Tom already made, that quite often by his fiercest opponents, Trump is portrayed as some kind of white nationalist. And then you have people the sort of MAGA Republicans portraying the Democrats as this wildly minority identitarian party. If you actually look in the last presidential election, it was actually white men in the Rust Belt that helped Biden over the line. And if you talk about that Trump's actually done quite, he's not so much performing well, but he's performed relatively well compared to previous Republican presidential candidates and Republican presidents. With certain minority groups. Now, for example, many people are still very surprised when I tell them in the last presidential election, Trump polled in the region of 30% among Muslim Americans. After the war on terror, in the second presidential election that George W. Bush Jr. Contested, he was in single digits. So he's actually brought his party forwards a great deal on those fronts. So it's quite interesting. The Trump-Biden axis was a very interesting era for American politics, because going against much of the rhetoric, they actually grew in terms of popularity with groups you wouldn't necessarily expect.
Yeah, definitely.
And touching on the Black Journalism Conference that Trump attended, he did receive some very hostile questioning, but I actually thought he held his own. And you know what? Fair play to him, because he actually turned up in person. I know that Kamala Harris was at a different engagement, but I think the optics of her not being there in person, but Donald Trump was, is quite interesting.